The last word my sister ever spoke to me was Tuesday. Not a warning, not a goodbye. Just the name of a day, dropped into the middle of a conversation about whether we needed more batteries for the garage flashlight. I'd asked her something I can't even remember what now. And she looked past me, toward the kitchen window, where the afternoon light was cutting hard lines across the counter. And she said, Tuesday, like she was answering a question no one in the room had asked. Then she closed her mouth, pressed her lips together. And that was it. That was Sunday, 3 days before the world ended. My name is Declan. I was 26 years old, living in the house I grew up in because our mother had died 8 months prior, and someone needed to be there while the estate worked through probate. My sister Mara was 23. She'd moved back in after Mom's diagnosis, never left, and in the months since the funeral had become someone I recognized less and less. Not in a dramatic way. Not in a way that made me call anyone. She just got quieter, took longer showers, started sleeping with her bedroom door locked, which she'd never done, not even as a teenager. I told myself it was grief. I told myself everyone processes differently. I told myself a lot of things that let me keep scrolling my phone at night instead of knocking on her door. Monday morning, she didn't come down for coffee. I made 2 cups anyway, left hers on the counter. By noon, it was cold and untouched. I knocked. No answer. I tried the handle locked. I said her name twice, then a 3rd time louder, and I heard the creak of her bed frame. She was alive. She was choosing not to respond. I almost called our aunt. Almost. But what would I say? My adult sister is giving me the silent treatment. She's grieving and wants space. I let it go. Monday night, I heard her door open around 2 in the morning. Footsteps down the hall to the bathroom. Water running. Then a sound I couldn't place, a scratching, rhythmic and deliberate, like a nail dragged across a hard surface. It lasted maybe 40 seconds. Then the water stopped. The footsteps returned, and her door clicked shut. I didn't get up. I lay in the dark and listened to the house settle, and told myself I'd talk to her in the morning. Tuesday, the day she'd named, I found the bathroom mirrors smeared with something. Toothpaste, I thought at first, but the marks were too deliberate. Lines, angles, shapes that didn't quite resolve into anything I could identify, but felt wrong the way a word you've said too many times stops sounding like language. I wiped it off with a towel. My hand was shaking, and I didn't know why. By Tuesday evening, the first reports were already circulating. Not on the major networks, yet they were still calling it a violent civil disturbance in Memphis, a mass casualty event of unknown origin in Baton Rouge. I saw it on Twitter. Shaky cell phone footage of people moving wrong, running at angles that didn't make sense for human joints. One clip, 6 seconds long, showed a woman in a parking lot biting into a man's forearm, while 3 others converged from different directions, unhurried, coordinated in a way that made my stomach drop. I showed my phone to Mara's locked door, held it up like she could see through the wood. Mara, something's happening. I need you to talk to me. Nothing. Then, and this is the part I replay, I heard her breathing change. Faster, not panicked, excited, like someone watching a race and their horse just took the lead. Wednesday morning, 72 hours of silence. I woke to the sound of the emergency broadcast tone cutting through my phone alarm, and for a few disoriented seconds, I thought it was a test. The text beneath the alert said, "Shelter in place. Avoid all contact with symptomatic individuals. Do not approach. Do not engage." Below that, a list of symptoms I couldn't process because my hands were shaking too hard to hold the phone still. I got dressed in the dark, jeans, boots, the flannel jacket hanging on my door. Moved on instinct. Downstairs, kitchen. Checked the locks on the back door, the front door, the sliding glass door to the patio. All secure. The street outside was empty in a way that felt wrong for 7 in the morning. No joggers, no cars idling at the end of the block, no garbage truck grinding down the avenue. Then I heard it. Not from outside, from upstairs. Mara's door was open. I took the stairs 2 at a time and found her room empty. Bed unmade, curtains drawn. The air smelled stale, like she hadn't opened the window in days. But there, spread across the floor in a half circle around the foot of her bed, were papers. Dozens of them. Torn from notebooks, from the backs of envelopes, from the margins of old textbooks stacked on her shelf. Every single one covered in lines. Maps. Not scribbled, not chaotic. These were precise. Hand-drawn with a steadiness that didn't match someone who hadn't eaten a full meal in 3 days. Roads I recognized: Calder Avenue, the old Route 9 overpass, the industrial corridor past the water treatment plant. But layered over them were markings I didn't understand. Circles, X marks, arrows converging on specific intersections. And in the corner of one page, written so small, I had to hold it inches from my face. They gather where the sound is loudest. I heard the floorboard creak behind me. Mara stood in the hallway, barefoot. Still in the clothes she'd been wearing, Sunday the gray t-shirt, the black leggings. Her hair was unwashed, pulled back in a knot that had half collapsed. She was looking at me with an expression I'd never seen on her face before. Not anger, not vacancy. Something between recognition and pity, like she was watching me realize something she'd known for a long time. "Mara, what is this?" She stepped into the room, walked past me to the window, drew the curtain back 1 inch and looked outside, scanning the street with the efficiency of someone checking a perimeter. "You need to talk to me, right now." She turned, held my gaze. Then she crossed to the papers on the floor, knelt, and picked up one specific sheet, a larger one, torn from a sketch pad. She held it up for me to see. It showed our neighborhood, our street, our house, marked with a single dot. And radiating outward, a series of routes traced in red pen, each one terminating at a different point. One ended at the elementary school 6 blocks north. One ended at the shopping center on Route 9. One ended at the river. She pointed to the route that led to the river, tapped it twice with her fingertip. Then she looked at me, and she nodded. Once. "That's where we go?" I asked. She nodded again. "Mara, how do you know this? What happened to you? Why won't you speak?" She set the map on the bed, walked to her closet, pulled out a backpack already packed, I realized. Already zipped and ready. She'd prepared this. While I was sleeping, while I was pretending everything was normal, she'd been packing. From outside, somewhere to the south, I heard a sound I'll never forget. A car alarm that started, wailed for 4 seconds, then cut off mid-cycle. Not because someone deactivated it, because something hit it hard enough to stop the mechanism. Mara moved for the stairs. Fast, certain. I grabbed the map and followed. We were out the back door in under 2 minutes. Mara moved like she'd rehearsed the route in her mind 100 times through the yard, over the low fence into the Hendersons' property, across their dead garden, and into the alley that ran behind the houses on Calder. She didn't hesitate, didn't look back to check if I was following. Her bare feet slapped the cold concrete, and she didn't flinch. I had the map in my jacket pocket. The backpack she'd handed me at the door hung heavy on my shoulders. I hadn't had time to check its contents. I wanted to stop, wanted to force a conversation, wanted to grab her arm and make her explain what was happening to her and how she'd known. But the sound from the south was growing. Not just the single car alarm anymore. A chorus of wrong sounds. Glass breaking in sequence, like dominoes. A dog barking in rapid-fire panic that cut off sharp. And underneath it all, a low murmur I couldn't identify. Not voices exactly, but not mechanical either. Organic, plural. Mara turned left at the end of the alley. This was the route on the map. I'd memorized the first few turns without meaning to left, straight for 3 blocks, right at the defunct gas station, then through the drainage culvert that ran beneath the old railway line. At the end of the first block, I saw them. 3 figures in the intersection ahead, 2 standing, 1 on the ground. The 2 standing weren't moving the way people move. Their weight was wrong, pitched forward, shoulders leading, heads tilted at angles that suggested the neck muscles had reorganized their priorities. They were still, listening. The one on the ground was crawling, but not away from them, toward them, dragging itself by its forearms while its legs trailed behind at an angle that meant the spine was compromised. Mara stopped, held up her hand, flat palm, fingers together, a military gesture. Where had she learned that? She pointed right. A narrow passage between 2 houses, barely wide enough for a person to pass through sideways. Not on the map. An improvisation. I went first, scraped my shoulder against brick, could feel the dampness of morning dew on the walls. Behind me, Mara slipped through with unnerving ease. Her thin frame an advantage I'd never considered in survival terms. We emerged on Birch Street, empty, quiet in a way that felt temporary. I grabbed her arm, gentle but firm. "Mara, look at me." She did. Those same eyes I'd known my whole life, brown, slightly too large for her face, always a little sad even when she smiled. But behind them, something was working, processing, calculating at a speed that didn't match the sister I knew. The one who used to cry at commercials and couldn't parallel park. "Can you talk? Physically, can you speak?" She opened her mouth, closed it. A flicker of something crossed her face, frustration maybe, or grief. She shook her head. Not a refusal, an admission. She couldn't. Something had taken her voice. Not her hearing, not her comprehension, not her will. Just the ability to convert thought into spoken language. But she could draw. She could plan. She could map routes through a city that was collapsing around us with a precision that suggested she understood the collapse's architecture. I let go of her arm, nodded. Okay, you lead, I'll follow." The relief on her face was so human, so recognizably my sister, that I almost broke. Almost pulled her into an embrace and told her everything would be fine. But the murmur from the south was louder now, and the 2 figures in the intersection behind us had started to turn, and their heads moved first swiveling smooth and slow, like surveillance cameras adjusting to motion. We ran. The drainage culvert smelled like rust and standing water. We crouched through it for maybe 200 yards, the ceiling so low I had to bend nearly double. Mara moved ahead of me, her backpack barely clearing the concrete above. Water soaked through my boots inside the first 30 steps. I could hear my own breathing amplified by the tunnel walls, each exhale bouncing back at me like the presence of someone I couldn't see. When we emerged on the other side of the railway line, the world had changed color. Not literally. But the quality of the morning light felt different past the tracks. as if we'd crossed into a zone where the rules had shifted. The houses here were older, smaller, packed tight. Many had already been abandoned before this foreclosure notices still visible in windows, lawns gone to seed. Now they were silent, watchful. Mara pulled a pen from the side pocket of her backpack, crouched against a chain-link fence, and smoothed the map across her thigh. She drew a small circle around our position, then a dotted line toward the next waypoint, the shopping center on Route 9. But she paused there, tapped the pen against the paper, then drew a new line, a deviation, curving east before reconnecting with the original route 2 blocks later. She looked up at me, pointed east. "Something's wrong with the direct route." She nodded, drew an X on the section of road she wanted to avoid. Then, beneath it, she wrote a single word in tiny block letters. "School, the elementary school." 6 blocks north on the original map, one of her marked endpoints, a gathering point. "They're at the school," I said, not a question. She nodded, then held up both hands and spread her fingers. "Close them, spread them again. 20, at least." I swallowed. "How do you know?" She pointed to her ear, listened, then pointed in the direction of the school, 2 blocks west of our position. I held my breath and focused. There, beneath the wind, a collective sound, not moaning, not screaming. A clicking, rhythmic and wet, like dozens of tongues pressing against the roofs of dozens of mouths in asynchronous patterns. It rose and fell, almost conversational. "They communicate," I said, and the words felt insane leaving my mouth. Mara's expression didn't change. She'd already known. We took her eastern route, through a backyard where a swing set creaked in the wind, past a shed with its door hanging open, tools scattered across the grass as if someone had grabbed what they could and fled. The clicking faded as we moved, replaced by distance and the ordinary sound of wind through overgrown hedges. At the corner of Elm and 9th, Mara stopped again, pressed herself flat against a wooden fence, and peered around its edge. I watched her body language, the tension in her shoulders, the slight lift of her chin, reading the environment like text on a page. She turned back, held up 2 fingers, then made a walking motion with them. Slow, patrol, 2 of them, moving, between us and Route 9. She pointed to a house behind us, a single story with a basement window visible at ground level. She mimed going down, waiting. "How long?" She shrugged, held up 5 fingers. 5 minutes? I hoped. We found the basement window unlocked. I went first this time, lowering myself into darkness that smelled like mothballs and old cardboard. Mara followed, pulling the window mostly shut behind her. We sat in the dark among stacked boxes and a broken exercise bike, and we waited while something moved past above us with footsteps too heavy and too evenly spaced to be human anymore. In the basement, with what little light filtered through the ground-level window, I finally checked the backpack Mara had packed for me. 2 water bottles, full, a box of granola bars, a first aid kit, the serious kind, with compression bandages and a suture kit, a flashlight with extra batteries, a folding knife still in its packaging, a change of socks, and at the bottom, wrapped in a plastic bag, a stack of papers, more maps. But these were different from the ones on her bedroom floor. These were dated. The oldest one was marked with a date 3 weeks prior. 3 weeks. Before anyone had heard the word Outbreak. Before Memphis. Before Baton Rouge. Before the first shaky cell phone video or the first emergency broadcast tone. My sister had been drawing maps of infection spread patterns 3 weeks before there was anything to spread. I looked at her across the dim basement. She was watching me discover this, waiting for my reaction with her knees pulled to her chest and her arms wrapped around them. 3 weeks, I said. My voice was barely a whisper, but it felt too loud. Mara, 3 weeks ago. How? She reached for the papers, flipped to the earliest one, pointed to a mark on it, a single circle, drawn in the same red pen, centered on a location I didn't immediately recognize. Then she wrote beneath it, Meridian Processing Plant, the old meat processing facility on the south edge of town. Closed for years, fenced off. I'd driven past it 1,000 times and never given it a thought. That's where it started? She nodded. Then she drew something new on the margin of the paper. A truck arriving at the plant. Then arrows radiating outward from it. Then small circles people. The circles multiplied, spread along roads, followed patterns. She'd watched this happen, somehow, from her bedroom window or in her dreams, or through whatever mechanism had stolen her voice and sharpened everything else. She had watched the infection's origin and traced its logic. You saw this in your sleep, I said. Because I remembered. The scratching sounds at 2 a.m, the toothpaste marks on the mirror, the locked door. She hadn't been withdrawing from grief. She'd been receiving something. She made a gesture I didn't understand at first, hands to her temples, then spreading outward. Then she pointed to her ear again and shook her head, not hearing it. Something else. Something arriving in a channel I didn't have access to. A thump above us. Then another. The footsteps had stopped directly over the basement. Something knew we were here, or suspected, or paused because the sound of our breathing had risen through the floorboards. Mara reached out and pressed her hand over my mouth. Not hard, gentle, a sister's hand, warm, steady. We stayed perfectly still for what felt like 10 minutes, but was probably 90 seconds. The weight above us shifted, creaked, then moved on, each step carrying it toward the front of the house and away. Mara removed her hand. In the faint light, I saw her write one more thing on the margin of the map. 2 words, underlined. They feel doubt. We waited another 20 minutes before moving. Mara counted it on her fingers. 4 cycles of 5. When she opened the basement window and pulled herself up, the street was empty. The sun was higher now, mid-morning, and it made everything look deceptively normal. Just another day in a neighborhood that happened to have no people in it. Route 9 was 3 blocks east. Mara's revised path took us through backyards and service alleys, and twice she stopped and redirected based on signals I couldn't perceive. Once she pressed her ear to a fence and listened for 30 seconds before shaking her head and pointing us south instead of east. Whatever frequency she was receiving on, it gave her a real-time awareness of their positions that I couldn't verify, but couldn't argue with. Every time she redirected us, I later heard or saw evidence that her caution was justified. A toppled garbage can still rocking, a smear on a window that hadn't been there 5 minutes ago. We reached the shopping center parking lot just before noon. It was vast and empty, maybe 300 abandoned cars scattered across an expanse of gray asphalt that shimmered with heat. The stores on the far side had their security gates half down, jammed in positions that suggested automated systems, failing mid-cycle. No movement that I could see. But Mara was tense. Her shoulders were high, her steps short and quick. She was scared for the first time since we'd left the house. She pulled me behind an SUV and pointed across the lot. At first, I didn't see what she was indicating. Then the angle of light shifted as a cloud moved, and I caught at a figure on the roof of the shopping center, standing at the edge. Not one of them. A person. Human posture, human proportions, holding something in both hands that caught the sun. Binoculars. Mara wrote on her palm with the pen, "Not safe." "That's a survivor," I said. "They might have supplies, shelter." She shook her head, wrote again, "They shoot." "How do you know that?" She pointed to a car 30 yards to our left. I looked, didn't see it at first. Then a hole in the driver's side window. Round, clean, bullet hole. And inside, slumped against the steering wheel, a shape that had been a person. Someone on that roof was shooting survivors who approached, protecting their territory. The shopping center had become a fortress, and not the kind that opened its doors. Mara's map hadn't led us to the shopping center for supplies or shelter. It had led us here to pass through the parking lot to reach the road beyond. But the sniper changed the equation. We'd have to cross 300 yards of open ground with a person on that roof who'd already demonstrated willingness to kill. She was already drawing. An alternate route on the map's margin, curving south around the back of the shopping center through what looked like a loading dock area. Longer, more enclosed, more places for them to hide. A choice between human violence above and inhuman violence at ground level. She looked at me, waiting for my input. The first time since this began that she deferred a decision. I looked at the loading docks, looked at the roof. The figure up there had lowered the binoculars and was scanning a different direction now. We had maybe 30 seconds of inattention. "South," I said. "We go around." She folded the map, moved. The loading docks behind the shopping center were worse than I'd imagined. Not because of what was there, but because of what had happened there. The concrete bays were stained dark in overlapping patterns that told a story I didn't want to reconstruct. Pallets overturned. A delivery truck with its rear door ripped off the hinges, not opened. Ripped. The metal peeled back like someone had gripped it with hands that didn't understand their own strength. We moved fast. Mara's feet were bleeding now. I'd noticed it in the parking lot, but hadn't stopped to address it. The concrete and gravel had done their work on her bare soles. And each footprint she left was rimmed in pink. I pulled her arm and pointed to her feet, held up the backpack. She shook her head, pointed forward, urgency overruling pain. But I stopped anyway. Knelt and pulled out the spare socks, thick hiking socks that would offer some protection. She let me put them on her feet, standing on one leg, then the other, balancing with her hand on my shoulder. The contact felt significant. The first time she'd accepted help, or allowed vulnerability. She squeezed my shoulder once. "Thanks." We cleared the loading area without encounter, but as we emerged onto the service road behind the shopping center, Mara froze. Not her cautious assessment freeze. This was different. Her whole body went rigid, and her hand gripped my forearm hard enough to leave marks. She was staring at something I couldn't see, or rather, staring at nothing visible. Her eyes were focused on middle distance, and they were moving, tracking something, reading something in the air itself. Then she released me, gasping, blinking like she'd surfaced from deep water. She grabbed the pen, wrote on the back of the map with shaking hands. "They're learning, faster than before." Learning what? Where we go. The words sat between us with a weight that pressed the air from my lungs. Not just tracking, not just responding to sound or movement. Learning patterns, anticipating routes. Whatever connected them, whatever network, made that clicking sound possible. That coordinated convergence, it was adaptive. It was studying us the way Mara was studying them. Can they track you? Whatever signal you're receiving? She paused, honesty moving across her face like pain. Then she wrote, "Maybe." Something twisted in my chest. My sister, my guide, my navigator, the only reason I was still alive, might also be a beacon. The thing that made her invaluable might also be drawing them to us with every step. She saw the thought arrive on my face, saw the calculation, and for the first time in 3 days, I saw her eyes fill with tears, not for herself, for the position she'd put me in. The impossible choice she could see forming behind my expression. I took the pen from her hand, wrote on the map myself, in letters large enough that she couldn't miss them. We stay together. She wiped her eyes with her sleeve, nodded, and we moved again, toward the river, toward whatever endpoint she'd identified, when her sleeping mind had traced the path that might keep us alive. The river route took us through the industrial corridor, half a mile, of warehouses, scrapyards, and empty lots choked with dead grass. It was the kind of terrain that offered long sight lines, but few hiding places. And Mara moved through it differently than she had through the residential streets. Less stopping, more speed. She trusted the openness to reveal threats at a distance and relied on pace to outrun anything we spotted. We'd covered maybe a quarter of the corridor when we found the others. There were 4 of them, survivors, I mean. Huddled inside a fenced compound that had once been an auto parts wholesale operation. Chain link and razor wire. A decent perimeter, compromised in at least 2 places I could see from the road. They spotted us before we spotted them, and a voice called out male, hoarse, aggressive in its caution. "Stop there, both of you. Hands where I can see them." I raised my hands. Mara didn't. She stood slightly behind me, assessing, her head tilted in that way she did now when she was listening on her private frequency. A man appeared at the fence gap, tall, thin, holding a tire iron across his body like a staff. Behind him, 3 others. A woman around 40 with a hunting rifle slung over her shoulder. A teenager, maybe 16, sitting on the hood of a junked car with his knees drawn up. And an older man, in a mechanic's uniform, his name patch reading Cole, leaning against the building with his arms crossed. "We're passing through," I said, "heading for the river." "River's no good," the tall man said. His name I'd learn later was Webb. "Bridge is out, both of them. They collapsed the eastbound lanes, and the westbound is crawling with those things." Mara touched my elbow. I looked back at her. She was shaking her head slowly, not disagreeing with Webb's information, acknowledging it but dismissing its relevance. Her route didn't use the bridges. "We're not crossing on the bridges," I said. Webb's eyes narrowed. "Then how?" "I'm not sure yet." The woman with the rifle stepped forward. "You should come inside, rest. We've got water, some food. That girl's feet are bleeding through her socks." Her name was Renee. Her voice was calm in a way that suggested she'd processed her fear already and emerged on the other side into pure pragmatism. I liked her immediately. Mara tugged my sleeve, wrote quickly on her palm, angling it so only I could see. 20 minutes, no more. I nodded. 20 minutes, I told the group. We need to keep moving. Webb stepped aside. We entered the compound. The teenager was named Jamie. He hadn't spoken since the first night, Renee told me quietly while Mara sat on a crate and let me clean her feet with antiseptic wipes from the first aid kit. Watched his mother go, right in front of him. Hasn't said a word. I looked at Jamie, looked at Mara. 2 kinds of silence, caused by entirely different mechanisms, arriving at the same visible result. "Where are you all headed?" I asked. "Nowhere," said Cole, the mechanic. "This is the plan. Fence, walls, hold." "That won't work," I said. "Not cruelty, mathematics. The fence was already compromised. They had no real weapons. And if Mara was right about the infected learning patterns, a static position was the worst possible strategy. "Then what do you suggest?" Webb asked. And the hostility in his voice was really fear. And fear made people dangerous. Mara stood up, walked to the fence and looked south toward the river. Then she turned and held up the map. They didn't trust the map. I wouldn't have either, in their position. A silent girl holding up a hand-drawn paper covered in marks that looked half like navigation and half like a fever dream. Webb actually laughed, short, sharp, humorless. Cole shook his head and went back to leaning against his wall. But Renee looked at the map. Really looked. Stepped forward and studied the lines and symbols with the attention of someone who'd spent time reading terrain. "These markings," she said. "These circles, what are they?" "Concentrations," I said. "Where they gather." "And these X marks?" "Places they've already cleared. Nothing left for them there, so they've moved on." Renee traced the route with her finger, the path from our current position to the river. It threaded between 3 major concentration zones, using blind spots in whatever network the infected operated on. It was elegant, if you could trust it. "How does she know this?" Renee asked. I didn't have an answer that would satisfy. "She's been tracking them since before the outbreak started." Webb snorted. "Before? That's 3 days ago. Nobody knew?" 3 weeks, I said. "She's been mapping this for 3 weeks. Silence. Even Cole uncrossed his arms. "That's not possible," Webb said. But his voice had lost its certainty. Mara was watching Jamie. The teenager hadn't moved from the car hood, but he was looking back at her now. Something passing between them that excluded the rest of us. 2 people sharing a silence that had different origins, but maybe similar textures. Mara walked to him slowly, held out the pen. Jamie stared at it, then at her. Then he took it. She spread the map on the hood beside him, pointed to something I couldn't see what from my angle. Then she pointed to him, then to the map again. Jamie wrote something, small, shaking. Mara read it, and her expression changed, sharpened. And she looked back at me with urgency burning in her eyes. I crossed to them, read what Jamie had written in the margin. "I hear them too." The ground beneath my understanding shifted. Not just Mara, not just some unique condition or supernatural gift. Jamie was receiving the same signal, the same awareness, which meant it wasn't personal. It was a transmission, something being broadcast that some people could pick up and others couldn't. Mara took the pen back, wrote beneath Jamie's words, "How long?" Jamie held up 4 fingers. 4 days. She wrote, "Before you stop talking." He nodded. There was a pattern. Receive the signal, lose your voice, gain the awareness. Whatever was happening to the infected was also happening to certain survivors, but differently. Not turning them violent, not restructuring their bodies. Instead, it was rewriting their interface with the world, taking speech, giving perception, as if the same frequency that networked the infected also opened a channel in some human minds, one that cost them their ability to produce language in exchange for the ability to read the network's structure. Mara looked at me, and in her eyes, I read the question she couldn't ask. "Does this change how you see me?" "No," I said. "We stay together. All of us." She looked at Jamie, at the map. Then she drew something new, a circle around the river endpoint. And inside it, a word I hadn't seen on any of her previous maps. Source. We left the compound 20 minutes later with 2 additions. Renee came. Webb and Cole wouldn't. "You're walking into hell on the word of 2 mutes and a paper map," Webb said, and maybe he was right. But I'd learned in the past 6 hours that Mara's paper maps had been right about everything else. Jamie came with us. He walked beside Mara, the 2 of them communicating in a way I couldn't fully track: gestures, pointed fingers, shared looks that contained information. Occasionally, one would write something for the other to read, then destroy the paper. I tried not to feel excluded. This was survival, not a social hierarchy. They had abilities I didn't. I had a voice they didn't. Between the 3 of us and Renee's rifle, we were something approaching functional. Renee fell in beside me as we moved south through the industrial corridor's final stretch. The river smell was reaching us now, brackish and thick, carrying the iron note of the water treatment plant. "You trust her?" Renee asked. Low, not challenging, genuinely asking. "She's my sister." That's not what I asked. I considered it, really considered it, for the first time since we'd left the house. Did I trust Mara? I trusted her intention. I trusted that she wanted to keep me alive. But did I trust the source of her knowledge? Did I trust that whatever was feeding her information wasn't also guiding her toward a purpose that served its own logic rather than ours? "I don't know," I admitted, "but I don't have a better option." "Fair enough," Renee said. And she unslung her rifle and held it ready as we approached the river. The bank was steep here, a concrete embankment sloping down to brown water maybe 40 feet across. Fast current, cold judging by the mist rising off its surface. The bridges were visible a half-mile downstream, and Webb hadn't been wrong about their condition. The eastbound was rubble. The westbound was intact, but I could see shapes on it, dozens, maybe more, standing in loose clusters that suggested waiting rather than wandering. Mara led us upstream, away from the bridges, away from the road, into the overgrown stretch where the river curved behind the water treatment plant. The plant itself was massive concrete and steel, pipes running in complex networks across its face, settling tanks visible behind a secondary fence. Quiet. Dead. Whatever automation had kept it running had failed, and without it the river was already starting to smell different. Worse. At a specific point marked on her map, I saw when she checked it, Mara stopped. She pointed down the embankment to a drainage outflow. A large concrete pipe, maybe 5 feet in diameter, extending from the treatment plant's base and emptying into the river. At current water level, the bottom third was submerged, but the top 2/3 were passable. She pointed into the pipe, then pointed at the far bank. "It crosses under the river?" She nodded. "Under the treatment plant?" Another nod. Renee looked into the pipe's dark mouth. "We can't see what's in there." Mara wrote on the map's edge. "Nothing. They avoid water." "You're sure?" She underlined avoid twice, then added, "Underground equals dead zone. No signal." I understood. If the infected operated on a shared frequency, and that frequency required some kind of transmission through air or proximity, then underground and underwater spaces were blind spots, gaps in their network, invisible to whatever coordination allowed them to converge and communicate. Which also meant that once we entered that pipe, Mara and Jamie would lose their awareness too. We'd all be blind together. Mara met my eyes. She knew. She was choosing it anyway. The pipe was cold and wet and utterly dark beyond the first 20 feet. I led with the flashlight. Mara behind me, one hand on my backpack strap. Jamie behind her, one hand on her shoulder. Renee bringing up the rear, her rifle useless in the enclosed space but comforting in her hands nonetheless. We moved single file, our footsteps echoing off curved concrete walls, slick with algae and mineral deposits. The water at the bottom rose to mid-calf as we moved deeper. Current pushed against our legs, not strong enough to threaten balance, but persistent. A reminder that we were inside a system designed to move things, not shelter them. The flashlight caught the walls and segments. Graffiti from a decade ago, some kid's tag, faded and ghostly. A maintenance marking in yellow paint. Then nothing. Just gray concrete stretching into black. Mara's hand on my strap tightened. I looked back. Her face in the flashlight's peripheral glow was strained. Pale in a way that went beyond the absence of sun. She was feeling the signal drop. Whatever channel she'd been receiving on was fading as the concrete and earth closed around us. And the loss showed on her face like the early stages of a migraine. Behind her, Jamie's expression mirrored hers, both of them withdrawing into themselves, retracting as the awareness that had guided us this far went silent. "Are you okay?" I asked. She gave a half nod, not convincing. We walked for what felt like an hour, probably 10 minutes. Time distorts underground. Every sound becomes significant, the drip of water, the scuff of a sole, the rhythm of breathing multiplied by 4 and bouncing off walls until it sounds like a crowd. Then the pipe opened, not into daylight, into a chamber. The flashlight's beam stretched and lost itself in a space too large for the light to fill. I swept it in an arc and caught fragments of the concrete floor, partially flooded. Metal walkways overhead, corroded green. Tanks, massive, cylindrical, their surfaces patched with rust. We were inside the water treatment plant itself, in its guts. The pipe hadn't crossed under the river, it had led into the plant's infrastructure. I turned to Mara, held up the map, positioning the flashlight to read it. Her route line didn't cross under the river in a straight line. It entered the plant, moved through it, and exited on the far side. The plant itself was the crossing point, a massive structure that bridged the river at its foundation level, built over the water rather than beside it. "We have to go through the whole plant." She took the map, pointed to a specific mark inside the plant's outline. An X, different from the X marks she'd used for cleared zones. This one was circled, twice. Renee moved up beside us. "What is that?" I shook my head. Mara hadn't told me, but she was pointing toward the dark interior with the same certainty she'd shown all day. Whatever was marked there, it was on our path. Maybe it was optional. Maybe it wasn't. We moved into the plant. The walkways groaned under our weight, but held. Renee tested each section before putting full weight on it, her movements careful and efficient. We climbed a set of metal stairs, Mara counting each step, with taps of her finger on the railing. As if memorizing the structure for a return trip she hadn't confirmed we'd need. At the top of the stairs, a door. Metal. Closed but not locked. Behind it, a room that had once been an office or control center. Desks, monitors, all dead. Filing cabinets. The kind of institutional space that looks abandoned even when it's in use. Mara went straight to a specific desk, pulled open its drawer. And from inside, she removed a manila folder. She'd known it was there. She opened it on the desk and spread its contents under my flashlight. Documents, not maps this time, typed pages, letterhead I didn't recognize, Meridian Biologic Applications. A subsidiary name, a corporate structure designed to be invisible. And in the folder, among the memos and spreadsheets, a single photograph. Aerial, the meat processing plant on the south edge of town. But in the photograph, it wasn't abandoned. It was operational. And behind it, visible in the aerial shot's wider frame, was a series of structures I'd never seen from the ground. Temporary buildings, containers, a compound that had existed and operated and been dismantled before anyone thought to look. Mara pointed to a date on one of the memos, 6 months ago. Then she pointed to another document, a shipping manifest. Biological materials, delivered to the Meridian Processing Facility, from a sender listed only as a numbered code. This wasn't a natural outbreak. It wasn't a virus that jumped species or a mutation that emerged from entropy. It was manufactured, released deliberately or accidentally from a facility that had existed in plain sight on the edge of our town. And my sister had known. For 3 weeks, she'd known. Because whatever signal the infected operated on, whatever frequency had been created along with them, had also reached her, had cracked open a window in her mind and shown her the architecture of the thing that was devouring the world. She looked at me with those brown eyes, and I saw the weight of it. 3 weeks of knowing alone. 3 weeks of watching it build while her voice drained away and no one believed the silence was anything but grief. I put my hand on the back of her neck. A gesture from childhood, how our mother used to comfort us. She leaned into it, just for a moment. Then she straightened, gathered the documents into the folder, put them in her backpack, and pointed toward the far door. We had to keep moving. The far side of the plant opened onto a maintenance catwalk that crossed above the river itself. Below us, water churned through massive gates, sluices that had been left open when the plant died, allowing the river to flow unregulated through the facility's treatment channels. The sound was immense, constant. White noise that swallowed everything else and made communication beyond direct proximity impossible. Which is why we almost didn't hear them. Renee grabbed my collar and pulled me backward. I stumbled, flashlight beam swinging wild, and in its arc I caught them 3 figures on the catwalk ahead, maybe 50 feet from us, standing in the spray zone where the water gates threw mist into the air. They weren't moving. They were just standing, facing us, heads tilted at that wrong angle, water streaming down their bodies and pooling at their feet. They shouldn't have been here. Mara had said they avoid water. She'd said underground was a dead zone. But here they were, standing in water spray, motionless and waiting. Mara's face showed something I hadn't seen since this started: confusion. She was as surprised as I was. Her model, her network map, her understanding of their behavior had just failed. Jamie was writing something on his hand, holding it up for Mara to read. In the flashlight's reflected glow, I caught fragments. Different. These ones are different. Different how? Different type. Different stage. Different purpose. The 3 figures hadn't moved. They stood in the mist, and they watched us, with faces I couldn't resolve, in the inadequate light. Not aggressive, not converging, waiting. As if we had something they wanted, or as if they were positioned there specifically to be found by people taking this exact route. Sentinels. The word arrived in my mind, unbidden. They were posted here, stationed, by whatever intelligence coordinated the network. Mara grabbed my arm. Her grip was iron. She pulled me back toward the door we'd come through, and her face was a mask of controlled terror that I'd never seen on another human being. Whatever she'd understood about these 3, it had changed her calculation fundamentally. We retreated into the control room. Mara was already at the map, pen moving fast, drawing new lines, erasing old ones with furious scratching. The route through the plant was compromised. Whatever dead zone the underground had provided, it had been anticipated, countered, The network was adapting in real time. Renee checked her rifle, magazine in, round, chambered. Her face was professional, detached. "Options?" she said. Mara was drawing something. Not a new route, a diagram, showing us the plant's layout, the catwalk we couldn't use, an alternative path through the lower levels, closer to the water, the sluice channels themselves. She wanted us to go through the water. "That current will take us off our feet," Renee said. Mara shook her head, pointed to a section of the diagram, a maintenance channel parallel to the main sluice. Narrower, shallower, designed for workers to access the gates for repairs. The water there would be waist-deep at most, and the flow reduced. "And those things up there won't follow us into the water?" I asked. Mara paused, then wrote, "They won't. These ones don't move." "They're standing in water spray," Renee pointed out. "But not in it. Spray isn't submersion. A distinction, a thin one. But it was all we had, because behind the door we'd retreated through, I could hear something new, the clicking. Faint through the metal, but unmistakable. The sentinels were communicating, broadcasting our position to whatever intelligence managed the network above ground. The clock on our invisibility was running out. "The channel," I said. "Now." The maintenance channel was exactly as Mara had drawn it. Narrow, concrete-walled, the water at chest height rather than waist as she'd estimated. Cold. The kind of cold that bypasses discomfort and goes straight to compromise, that slows your thinking and makes your hands stupid. We waded through it single file, the rushing sound of the main sluice to our right, separated by a concrete wall that vibrated with the force of water behind it. Jamie slipped once, went under, came up gasping, eyes wild. Mara caught him by the collar and hauled him upright, with a strength that surprised me. She held him steady until his breathing normalized, then placed his hand back on her shoulder and kept moving. The gesture was maternal, protective, as if in losing her voice she'd gained some older language of care that didn't require words. The channel ran the full width of the plant's river section, maybe 200 feet. It felt like miles. My legs went numb from the cold inside the first minute. My boots filled with water that added weight to every step. The flashlight was in my teeth now. My hands pressed against the walls for stability, and its beam showed nothing ahead but more gray concrete and dark water. Then, light. Not my flashlight. Natural light, filtering in from ahead where the channel opened onto the far bank. A semicircle of brightness that grew as we approached, resolving into morning sun on muddy earth and the sound of birds, actual birds, unbothered by the apocalypse, singing in trees that didn't know the world had ended. We emerged onto the river's east bank, soaked, freezing, alive. I counted heads: Mara, Jamie, Renee, me, all present, all shaking but upright. The landscape here was different, less developed. Trees closing in. The edge of the suburban world giving way to something older and less organized. A gravel road ran parallel to the river, disappearing into woods to the south. Mara was immediately changed. The moment she cleared the channel and stood in open air, her posture shifted. Her chin lifted. Her eyes went wide and then focused, sharp, locking onto something invisible to the rest of us. The signal was back, the awareness flooding in after its underground absence. She swayed. Jamie did too, and I caught her arm. "Easy, take a second." She steadied herself, blinked. Then her expression became something I can only describe as certain. Not hopeful, not relieved, certain. She pointed down the gravel road, south, into the trees. "How far?" I asked. She held up 2 hands, closed them, opened them. 20. Minutes, I assumed. Is it safe? She looked at me, and for the first time, she shrugged. An admission that felt more honest than all the confident nods that had come before. She didn't know if it was safe. She knew it was where we needed to go. Those weren't the same thing. Renee wrung water from her jacket. Your sister, she said to me, quiet enough that Mara wouldn't catch it. Is she leading us to a refuge, or to the thing that did this? I didn't answer. Because the truth was, I'd been asking myself that question since she wrote source on the map, and I still didn't have an answer that let me sleep. But I kept walking. Because she was my sister. Because 3 days ago, she'd said John. Tuesday, like a prophecy, and now Tuesday was over, and we were still alive, and every decision she'd made had kept us that way. Even if where she was taking us was the center of the infection. Even if the source wasn't something you survived reaching. The gravel road wound through increasingly dense forest for exactly the time Mara had indicated. 20 minutes of walking through woods that felt untouched. No debris, no bodies, no signs that the infection had reached this far. Birds in the canopy, a deer startling and bolting at our approach. The ordinary world persisting in a pocket that the network hadn't yet consumed. Then the trees opened, and we were there. It wasn't what I expected. No facility, no compound, no concrete or chain link or military infrastructure. It was a clearing, natural. A bowl-shaped depression in the earth, maybe 100 yards across, carpeted in grass that was greener than the surrounding forest, despite the autumn date. At its center, a structure that defied easy description, part rock formation, part something else. It rose from the ground, like a molar tooth. Dark stone veined with something that caught the light in colors I don't have confident words for. Not metallic, not bioluminescent. Something between the two. Something that pulsed at a rhythm too slow for a heartbeat, but too regular for randomness. Mara walked toward it. Jamie followed. Renee and I stopped at the clearing's edge. That's not a building, Renee said. Her voice was flat, matter-of-fact. The voice of someone looking at something impossible and deciding not to process it yet. No, I agreed. It's not. Mara and Jamie stood before the stone structure. Both of them still, both tilting their heads the same angle, I realized with a chill, that the infected used. Listening on their channel, receiving whatever this thing was broadcasting. Mara turned back to me. Her face was peaceful in a way that made me deeply uncomfortable. Not the peace of resolution, the peace of surrender, of someone hearing an answer to a question they'd been carrying too long. She beckoned me forward. I went. Renee stayed at the edge, rifle raised, watching the tree line. Good soldier, good instinct. Up close, the stone was warm. I could feel the heat radiating from it at 2 feet. The veined material within it moved not quickly, but visibly. Circulating like blood through capillaries, except the capillaries were rock, and the blood was light. Mara put her hand against the stone surface, pressed her palm flat, her eyes closed. And I watched something happen to her face, a series of micro-expressions flashing too fast to read. Surprise, understanding, grief, wonder, resignation, and finally something I could only call acceptance. When she opened her eyes, they were wet. She removed her hand, reached into the backpack and pulled out the folder from the treatment plant, held it up for me to see. Then she opened it to a page I hadn't read before. A memo near the bottom of the stack, dated 8 months ago, the same month our mother had died. The memo described a discovery. Workers at the Meridian processing plant had found something during an expansion dig. A geological anomaly. Organic mineral structure, the memo said, of unknown origin and composition. They'd attempted to extract a sample. The extraction had released something, a frequency, a signal, and the workers who'd been present during the extraction had stopped speaking within 72 hours. They'd been the first, not victims, witnesses, receivers. Our mother hadn't died of cancer, or she had, technically. But the cancer had come first because she'd worked at Meridian for 20 years. She'd been there during the discovery. She'd been exposed. And whatever the exposure had done to her had taken its time, had eaten her from inside slowly. While the faster version, the violent version, the one that restructured bodies and erased minds, had been refined in a lab, from samples extracted from this stone and released on purpose by people who wanted to understand what it could do. Mara knew because she'd inherited the sensitivity, daughter of an exposed mother. The signal found her because she was already attuned, already shaped for it by genetics she'd never chosen. She put the folder back in the bag, looked at the stone, looked at me, and she pointed to it with a question in her eyes. What do we do? The stone pulsed, slow, patient. It had been here long before Meridian, long before our town, probably. Something ancient and alien and incomprehensible. And humans had cracked it open and let the signal out, and now the signal was rewriting everything it touched. Can it be stopped? I asked. Not her, not anyone. The air. Mara shook her head. Not a guess, a knowledge. Whatever the stone had told her through her palm, it included this truth. This wasn't something that could be stopped. Only understood. Only adapted to. Only survived with the right information at the right time. She pulled the pen one final time, wrote on the back of the folder with calm, deliberate strokes. We tell people, we map it all, every zone, every pattern. We give them what I see. Not a cure, not a weapon. A guide. A living, growing map maintained by those who could hear the network, the unwilling translators between the frequency and the human world. Sentinels of a different kind. I looked at my sister, at the girl who'd stopped talking 3 days ago and saved my life by drawing in her sleep. At the cost she'd already paid, and the cost still coming. She couldn't speak, might never speak again. But she could see what others couldn't, and she was choosing to make that sight into a gift instead of a wound. Okay, I said. Then we start now. She nodded, and behind her, Jamie nodded too. And the stone pulsed its slow pulse, and the birds kept singing in the trees, and somewhere behind us, miles back now, the world was still ending. But here, in this clearing, something else was beginning. We stayed at the clearing for 3 hours. Mara filled page after page, roots, zones, timing patterns, behavioral rules. Jamie added his own observations, his handwriting shakier, but his information from a different neighborhood, a different vector, filling gaps in her coverage. Between them, they produced a survival document unlike anything that existed. Not a weapon, not a prayer, a map. Renee and I stood watch. Nothing came. The clearing seemed to exist in a null space visible to the network but untouched by it, the way the eye of a storm is technically inside the storm but experiences none of its violence. When the maps were done, we left, headed north, toward the population, towards the people still alive and running blind. I carry the folder now, the documents from Meridian, the proof that this was made, not born. Someday it might matter. Someday someone might be in a position to hold accountable the people who cracked open something they didn't understand and let it loose on the world for the sake of understanding. But today isn't that day. Today is about the next town, the next group of survivors, the next person we can reach before the network reaches them first. Mara walks ahead of me still. Barefoot again, she wore through the socks hours ago. But she doesn't seem to feel it anymore. Her feet have hardened. Her silence has become something other than loss. It's become a language I'm learning to read in gestures, in the angle of her chin, in the way she draws. She hasn't spoken since Sunday. I don't know if she ever will again. But she told me everything that mattered, without a single word. And when I look at the map she made in her sleep, the one that started all of this, the one that got us out alive, I understand that her silence wasn't a symptom. It was the first translation.